Hello, I'm Captain Carrie Gandy. This lesson gives you the basics of real property so that you can engage with your real property officer at your installation and understand how your inventory is structured. A lot of changes are happening with real property at the enterprise level this fiscal year. In fact, a lot of AFIs are changing, so stay tuned to CE- and AFIT CIT for changes. A savvy asset manager will lean on their real property officer expertise. The purpose of this lesson is to make sure you understand the importance of real property and that you're speaking the same language. So, understanding real property is the foundation to answering the first question of asset management. What do we have? So, what do we have? We have millions of assets in the Air Force, from aircraft to different types of buildings to equipment and the tools we use to do our jobs. We use real property to define the boundaries around the natural and built infrastructure assets that make up the visibility for our asset management portfolio. So this kind of creates our boundaries. So the Air Force has all type of assets: aircraft, vehicles, human capital, logistics, IT. The chart here is just a small sample. CE assets, in particular, comprise all of the assets that we use in our enterprise to deliver combat support. That includes the built and natural infrastructure that we talk about in asset management, but it also includes things like human capital, equipment, tools, vehicles, things like that. When we talk about real property, we're defining the assets we manage into built and natural infrastructure. This is what we're concerned with throughout this course and all of our asset management portfolio here at the CE School. The principles of asset management can be applied throughout the Air Force, but of course we're concerned with built and natural infrastructure. This helps us define our asset management boundaries in terms of real property. These delineations are important because we're only resourced and authorized to maintain real property. Real property is the backbone of our inventory, and it provides us with visibility of our assets as defined by the asset management framework. So here are some real property definitions from AFI 32-9005. So in the AFI, it defines that a facility is a building, structure, or linear structure whose footprint extends to an imaginary line surrounding a facility at a distance of 5 feet from the foundation. A facility will have a real property unique identifier, or RPU ID, and will be cataloged into the service real property inventory as a unique real property record. Notice that a facility is more generic than just a building. We'll continue to use this term throughout our courses, so it's important. In particular, a building is a roofed and floored facility enclosed by exterior walls and consisting of one or more levels that's suitable for single or multiple functions and that protects human beings and their properties from the direct harsh effects of weather. A linear structure is a facility whose function requires that it traverse land, like a runway, a road, a rail line, a pipeline, a fence, pavement, electrical distribution lines. Or it is otherwise managed or reported by a linear unit of measure, like feet or meters, within the real property inventory. Structures are a facility other than a building or linear structure that is constructed on or in the land. Examples of structures could be a bus stop, covered material storage like we use in CE, or a cement pad for equipment. Over all of these things, real property is the land and improvements to land that could be any of these categories. Now, I want to put specific emphasis on the last term. We have to consider some of the larger or integral equipment items which allow a facility to meet its intended purpose. In order for us to do this, we must define something called real property installed equipment, or RIPE. RIPE is an item of equipment that is affixed and built into a facility as an integral part of that facility. To qualify as RIPI, the equipment must be necessary to make the facility complete, and if removed, would destroy or severely reduce the design usefulness and operation of the facility. RIPI must be accounted for in the real property record. Now, in order to test your real property acumen, we're going to do a quick activity. I'm going to put 5 different equipment items up on the slide and step off the screen so that you can think about whether they qualify as RIPI or not. Remember, RIPI is permanently attached real property, generally installed as a part of a construction project that cannot be removed from the structure without physically damaging the structure, and without which the facility would be unable to operate as designed. So I recommend that you pause the video, make some notes to yourself about why you think each asset is RIPI or not RIPI. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can determine which ones are RIPI and which ones are not. Afterwards, I'll explain. Okay, so hopefully you gave it a try. The first one we're going to talk about is chalkboards. RIPI or non-RIPI? They're RIPI, but only if they are fully integrated into the building. Portable chalkboards don't count. The reason is, if the facility is something like an education center, it's required for the function of that facility. What about parking guidance systems? RIPI or not RIPI? They are not RIPI. They're helpful to know how many spaces are left, but they don't keep you from parking in the parking structure. What about lifeguard stands? RIPI or not RIPI? Yeah, they're RIPI, provided, again, that they are permanently installed, because the lifeguard has to be there for the public pool to function. Okay, what about oil-water separators? They're required for compliance with environmental regulations, but are they RIPI? Yes. Again, if they are permanently installed, integral part of the facility or system, like a wash rack, for example, they are real property installed equipment. Finally, heat pumps. RIPI or not RIPI? Yes, they're RIPI, provided, again, they are permanently connected to a utility line. How'd you do? Were you a real property expert on figuring out if something is RIPI or not? Well, never fear, because a lot of great examples are in AFI 329005. Like I said, this AFI will be updated later this year, but a lot of the real property installed equipment guidelines will stay the same. It's in attachment 2 of this document. It's also a great resource if you want to quiz your coworkers. So let's talk about non-real property definitions. I'll step off the slide again and talk about what it means to be non-real property installed equipment. Here we're talking about an item of equipment that is not integral to the function of the facility. So exactly the opposite. There's also something called real property similar equipment, or RIPSI, which is equipment that can be repaired by the BCE if resources are available and the owning unit reimburses cost. You may also come across the acronym EAID, or Equipment Authorization Inventory Data. This refers to more non-RIPI equipment that is tracked by base supply. So that gives you a clear indication if it is on that list, the EAID list, then it's not RIPI. So just like real property installed equipment, there's also an attachment in 329005, attachment 3, that talks about guidance for non-RIPI. In the case of the real property similar equipment, there may be exceptions where you can work on this non-RIPI equipment if the resources are available again. So real property policy, which It is going to change this fiscal year, but is still going to be trying to accomplish two main tasks: to establish and maintain an accurate inventory of installation's real property portfolio, or what do we have, and to facilitate use of real property assets in the most optimum sense. That is, how are we going to invest in our real property portfolio? Since an understanding of real property forms the foundation of our inventory, provides us visibility of our assets, and answers the first question of asset management, again, what do we have? It's little wonder that there are lots of policy directives to ensure that we have accurate real property records. At the outset of the asset management movement in the Air Force, the P Plan identified several goals for real property, and these are the two: to establish and maintain this inventory, and to facilitate optimum use of them. So I want to talk a little bit about what the Real Property Office does. They're responsible for all real property assets under the installation's control. There's generally only one Real Property Accountable Officer, RPAO, per the installation. This includes sub-installations. So they have special orders signed by the installation commander, that is G-series orders. They deal with people across the squadron and a variety of transactions that impact them. And they coordinate with local governments, private organizations, and private citizens to make the right real property decisions for the installation. They also prepare things like in-grants and out-grants that, if the Air Force has an interest in real property in less than fee ownership, that would be an in-grant, or an out-grant is when the Air Force has granted real property rights to someone else. That way, maybe they don't have to maintain that land anymore. They also do all of the compliance inspections required by in-grants and out-grants. Those have to be reviewed annually. And they work with the Wing Plans and Programs Office for new mission bed downs and things like that. They're a major player in installation development planning. So if that's relevant to you, you're going to want to get to know your real property officer or real property accountable officer. They can answer a ton of your questions, like if there's something that you're not sure if it's RIPI and it's not specifically called out in AFI 32-9005, they can answer those questions. You can talk to them about how to get more space for a certain tenant, and they can also help you with whether a work order gets capitalized, if it's kind of right on that line. They're really familiar with all those rules, and as an asset manager, are a great resource for you. The policy that drives this real property inventory requires us to have a real property accountable database. There are lots of data fields, but a few of them that are of interest are a real property site unique identifier, a real property unique identifier, which I talked about a little bit before. Every facility is going to have one of those. A facility number, category code, or CAT code, which we'll talk about later, helps you define your mission dependency index. There's going to be a quantity or unit of measure. This might help you figure out if the item is a linear system or a building. And cost. This is an assessment of the financial value of that particular asset to the organization. It includes things like capitalization costs, operations and maintenance costs, and plant replacement value. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the data in the Real Property Accountable Database, or RPAD, but it lists out some of the data that might be interesting to us as asset managers. All of this data must be managed, and if it's a data point that's required by your sustainment management system or work management system, it's going to have to be replicated and maintained to be accurate. This data management is really essential, and the Real Property Office is specifically tasked with ensuring, at least on the RPAD, that the real property records are accurate. It's definitely a full team effort, though, to make sure that this data is updated and accurate. So what are the triggers to make sure that we have to update our data? The main one is physical inspection, book to floor, floor to book, of all of our assets every 5 years. Or if you spread that out evenly, that's 20% of your assets have to be looked at and make sure they match the real property record every year. And historic assets are a little bit more strict. Those have to be looked at every 3 years if you have them on your installation. Of course, if there's new construction, a facility is capitalized. That has to go in the real property record. Also, if it meets the requirements to be a major repair, that is enough of the facility has been reconstructed or repaired, that could also trigger a real property update. If there's a modification to the footprint of the facility or any of the relevant quantities of real property data, that has to be updated. And also, if there's a change of use, a change of function of the facility, there must be a corresponding update to the real property record. So I want to take us back to our asset management model to talk about how asset management truly hinges on the principle of visibility, and the real property inventory is the backbone of our asset inventory. If we don't have it right at that facility level, again, I mean that generically, if a facility isn't just buildings, if we don't have it right at the facility level, we'll never get it right at the system and component level in our work management systems and sustainment management systems. So I want you to really keep these definitions in your back pocket so that you can effectively communicate across the enterprise, especially with your real property officer, and understand the boundaries of our infrastructure asset management. They're all in AFI 32-9005 or the updated version when you need them. In particular, I want you to remember that a facility is not necessarily a building. We will continue to use the term facility to talk generically about buildings, linear structures, and structures throughout our asset management courses. So, this concludes this lesson on real property basics. Remember,